These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.
It's been almost 25 years since the Nisqually earthquake. That's the last big one to hit Seattle.
We got out of there and we did not dare go back inside. We're all saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And there were bricks on the sidewalks. I think a car got smushed.
But the region is due for an even bigger one. It could be more massive than the underwater quake that just hit off the coast of Russia.
Earthquakes and tsunamis on many people's minds, especially here on the West Coast after Russia's record-setting quake.
One of the strongest earthquakes on record, like ever.
I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Monica Nicholsberg. This is Booming, a podcast about the economic forces shaping our lives here in the Pacific Northwest.
The Nisqually quake did at least $2 billion worth of damage across the Puget Sound region. It hit Seattle's historic brick and stone buildings hard, and we've learned a lot since then about what could make them safer.
But it's going to take a lot of money, like more than $1 billion, to make them strong enough to withstand the next one. And that means some owners of those old buildings may prefer to abandon or destroy them rather than pay for expensive retrofitting.
So is old Seattle worth saving? And is there a way to do it that won't bankrupt the owners or the city? That's coming up.
The time could be tomorrow. The city sleeps, and suddenly, millions are at the mercy of nature's most merciless attack. Earthquake.
So Joshua, I've never been in an earthquake in Seattle, but I grew up in California, and earthquakes there are just a part of life. We actually ended up moving out of our house in Brentwood when I was a kid because of damage from the Northridge earthquake. I know you're going to get to how vulnerable buildings in Seattle are to an earthquake and what it would take to protect them, but I'm just curious, exactly how big is the risk here?
Well, Seattle has an 85% chance of experiencing a damaging earthquake in the next 50 years, so almost a 9 in 10 chance.
That's big.
Yeah. It's not really a matter of if, but when. There are two scenarios that scientists worry about. One is a megathrust earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone. That's where the ocean floor slips beneath Washington's coast. That's the big one that people talk about. A quake like that would produce catastrophic, widespread damage throughout the whole region.
That's the one from the 2015 New Yorker article that made a really big splash here.
Yeah.
So what's the second risk?
The other risk is an earthquake on the Seattle Fault. It's a shallow fault that runs directly beneath the city, right under the most vulnerable buildings we have. And because of where it is, it would likely do far more destruction than a Cascadia quake, at least in Seattle. And the longer we go without either one, the more pressure builds up, and the more likely one is to happen. Here's what Megan Anderson says. She's one of the state's top seismologists.
It's a little bit hard to think about how to say this in a way that, doesn't alarm people, because it really is hard to imagine, even for us scientists. It would be a really disruptive event for the United States, not just Seattle.
Wow. This has me thinking about my own house. It was built in 1940, and the foundation definitely has some cracks. Is it safe for me to be in an old building like that during an earthquake?
Well, some wood houses are good at bending rather than breaking. In a wood house, you're safer if the house is bolted to the foundations, I'll say that. But you're even better off in a modern office building or a residential skyscraper. Large buildings built to modern codes have all kinds of engineering to mitigate damage from swaying and shaking. But where you face the greatest risk is if you're in an old, unreinforced brick building. And Seattle has a lot of those, more than 1,000.
These are the beautiful old brick buildings that are all over Seattle, right? I've seen them in Pioneer Square, but also closer to me in the U District and Capitol Hill. They give the city a lot of its character.
Yeah. And they're a good reminder that Seattle isn't just made out of steel and glass. I think it's fair to say that tourists and locals appreciate the old school charm of the Pioneer Building or the Klondike Museum or the old Grand Central Arcade. Many of these brick buildings offer low rent options in a city desperate for more affordable housing. But most of those have not been upgraded to withstand earthquakes. Their walls are just stacks of bricks and stones held together by mortar. And during an earthquake, the walls can collapse. And the fear is that this could happen when people are inside. Nobody died in the Nisqually quake, but next time we may not be so lucky.
Yeah, it's sobering to think about. Is it possible to make these buildings safer?
Yes. I put that question to someone at the city.
We know how to fix these buildings. We know how to seismically retrofit them to reduce the probability of collapse.
That person you heard is Amanda Hertzfeld, and she runs this program at the city that tries to encourage building owners to make these upgrades. Amanda is kind of an interesting person. She says her obsession with earthquakes began as a college student watching Hurricane Katrina on TV.
And my geology professor says, while this is happening, an earthquake in Seattle will be our Katrina. And that's a really bold statement to make. And he says, look at all these brick buildings on campus and around the city. And my immediate reaction to that was, well, why aren't we doing anything about this? And I've kind of been chasing the answer to that question for decades now.
So what is Amanda doing?
Well, her team started by making a list of every unreinforced masonry building in the city. They finished that assessment in 2023. And what they found is that there are more than 1,000 of these unreinforced brick buildings. About half are offices and half are apartments. And being on that list is not good.
Why not?
Well, it opens the owners up to liability. They can't claim that they didn't know their building was dangerous. The list gives Amanda leverage to encourage building owners to make the necessary retrofits. For example, using steel to anchor floors to walls, connecting the hip bone to the leg bone, so the walls can't fall away. Or like covering the whole floor with plywood to make it rigid. And bracing the parapets, that's the part of the brick wall that extends above the roof, so they don't fall on the sidewalk.
So are building owners making any of these changes?
Only a few so far, 7 out of those 1,000-plus buildings. But the city council wants to make it mandatory to get off that list. And it wants to help building owners pay for that work, which could get really expensive. The council passed a non-binding resolution last year saying that they want to make it required, and the mayor appears to support the idea. But people expected this to happen in 2020, and it didn't.
Why hasn't it gotten more momentum?
Well, there are some little steps that they've taken along the way to get closer to it. But yeah, the big thing making it mandatory has not happened. I mean, the pandemic got in the way and budget problems, of course.
Okay, so right now, retrofits are voluntary and only a few buildings have done them. Why aren't more owners hopping on board here?
Well, it's expensive. It can cost, at the low end, $75 a square foot, but up to hundreds of dollars per square foot to make this happen. So you add that up in a big building, it's a big number, Everybody wants to make these buildings as safe as possible, but if the price tag is too high, building owners might give up. One person I talked to, Leslie Morishita, she works for a nonprofit that restores these buildings.
Our concern is that it's going to scare owners and they're going to sell. They're going to be like, there's no way, we don't have this kind of money, we can't do it.
And then they might sell to someone who tears it down or retrofits it, but then jacks up the rent. I talked to a building owner named Jan Johnson. She owns the Panama Hotel in the historic Chinatown International District. And she had another concern, abandonment. She made an analogy to what happened when the city began requiring fire sprinkler systems in buildings.
So they made it mandatory you had to sprinkle, and a lot of people couldn't afford it, so they just shut the buildings down and they became a ghost town. But a lot of buildings closed.
So do you think that doing full seismic upgrades would create the same problem again?
It would, I think so, and some people, I know it would on me. Today it would, just financially.
And you can see that nearby. There are already buildings with boarded up windows above the street level.
That's a tough spot to be in. I can understand feeling like it's unfair to have the government force you to do upgrades that you can't afford. But ultimately, we're talking about keeping buildings safe in an earthquake. I mean, isn't that something that residents would want?
Well, yes. I mean, they want it, but they also want affordable housing. And there is a concern that a mandatory program could also destroy affordability for residents. Leslie Morishita pointed out a building with low-rent apartments that's especially important to the community in the Chinatown International District, important for its beauty and for its connection to an old Chinese family association that built it. But it's in bad shape. Only about 12 of its many small apartments are occupied for safety reasons.
I think it's mostly elder Chinese folks, limited English speaking, extremely low income. I mean, they live here mostly because the rent is very, very low.
Like $150 a month to $650 a month for a one-bedroom.
Yeah, it would be hard to find that somewhere else in Seattle.
It's true. So Leslie wants to fix up the building so that it's safe in an earthquake, and she wants to open up more of the apartments, and she wants to keep the rents low so those elderly folks can continue to live there. Her organization can do that because it's a nonprofit and it can cover the upgrade costs, with grants and stuff. But most old brick buildings won't have a nonprofit to come to the rescue. That's the point Rick Moeller made to me. He's the Dean of Architecture at the University of Washington.
It's really up to the building owner to decide whether or not those properties remain affordable. Virtually all of them will need to be seismically upgraded, and that's a very expensive process. That will inevitably lead to increased rents in those buildings to account for the cost of seismically upgrading them.
And he's not arguing against fixing them up. He's just saying that right now we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that this work comes without a cost.
Okay, so you've got all of these competing priorities: safety, historic preservation, and affordability. And you mentioned that the city wants to find money to help owners pay for it. Can that solve the problem?
No. I mean, the city doesn't have enough money to cover all these retrofits. The owners don't either. It could cost over $1 billion. So they're also doing something significant to try to lower the cost. And it represents a really big shift in philosophy. They've lowered the standards for seismic reinforcement for some buildings. Under the new standards, you only have to make these old brick buildings strong enough that everyone can get out alive. That means after an earthquake, they may be so damaged that they have to be torn down, but at least nobody will have died. And it's cheaper, less than half the cost of a full retrofit. The hope is that more building owners will do it, even before it's required by law.
It seems counterintuitive, like they're saying lowering the standard can save more lives.
Yes, it is counterintuitive. But they also say that it's better to do something than nothing, and this will mean more people do something.
This whole discussion gets at how hard it is to feel the right amount of urgency for a catastrophe that we know is imminent, but it's probably not happening tomorrow. Like, I've needed to get an earthquake bag together forever. But every month it felt like there was other stuff that we needed to budget for that took priority. And I finally did it, but only because the tsunami warning and all of your reporting has just freaked me out.
That is such a perfect analogy for why this has not happened at the city.
So where does that leave us?
There is one creative solution that wouldn't cost owners anything, but could help many of them pay for upgrades. It's called Transfer of Development Rights, or TDRs, as people call them. It's an idea that's been around for a while, but it hasn't been used in this exact way. If your building isn't as tall as zoning allows, you can give up your right to build taller on your own property and sell that unused, unbuilt height to a developer building a skyscraper somewhere else in the city, so they can build taller. That unused airspace is valuable, and selling it brings in enough money for owners of the old buildings to pay for seismic upgrades. That's the theory. Essentially, you can sell the air above you and use the money to save your old building.
It seems so silly, but if it could help pay for earthquake upgrades that are desperately needed, then I'm here for it.
Yeah, and Rick Moeller says it's a win-win. But he says the current process for TDRs needs to be expanded and simplified so that more people can actually use it. Right now, the process is cumbersome and projects using them are rare. And plus, they're not designed for this purpose.
So fixing these old buildings is expensive and it's complicated. There are trade-offs. But at the end of the day, we're talking about saving lives in an earthquake. And it makes me wonder, are these old buildings really worth saving?
Well, we want to save as many lives as possible. That may or may not mean saving an old building. But there are many other reasons to say the buildings are worth saving, especially in historic communities like the Chinatown International District. For many families, these old buildings are the only place they can afford to stay in a community built by their ancestors who immigrated here. And if TDRs become more viable and the city finds a way to fund the retrofitting of old buildings, then maybe more of these apartments can stay affordable to the people who live in them. It's not black and white, and that is what the city is wrestling with.
All right. Well, thanks for the story and for motivating me to finally get my earthquake bag together. Coming up, I know you have an end game for me and our producer, Alec Cowan, who we're going to bring in. And it sounds like it's about something terrifying, which is what happens underground in Seattle during an earthquake. That's coming up.
Hey, I'm Ton Vin, host of Seattle Eats, a food podcast from the Seattle Times and KUOW. Seattleites have driven across the border to get Chinese food in Richmond, BC for decades. But Bellevue has become a major player. On the latest episode of Seattle Eats, I'm highlighting the dishes defining this new hotspot. Listen to Seattle Eats on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The End Game. We're mixing it up this time. Joshua, you have prepared the game, and we are bringing in our producer, Alec Cowan, as my, is this a cooperative game or my competitor?
Well, it's always nice to have a little competition, see who can answer more realistically. But, we're all in this together, so.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Game on.
All right. So I want to quiz you, Monica and Alec, about what's going on under the ground during an earthquake in Seattle. This is all based on stuff that I learned from Washington State geologist Megan Anderson. She's a seismologist. A lot of people have heard about the Cascadia subduction zone where the seafloor is sliding under the West Coast.
The really big one.
The really big one. I was less familiar with the Seattle fault myself until doing some of this reporting. It turns out there are many east-west faults all over Western Washington. And before we get to the question, I just got to tell you this funny detail. The reason why is that our state is being squeezed by Canada from the north and by Oregon from the south, like it's in a vice. And it forces Western Washington to fold up like an accordion. And one of these fold lines is the Seattle fault.
There's a great joke in here somewhere, but I can't think of it.
Accordionaires across Washington are brainstorming now. Well, when people talk about the next big one, they're usually talking about the Cascadia fault. But, as we discussed in the story, the Seattle fault would probably do a lot more damage in Seattle. So my first question to each of you is, what route do you think the Seattle fault takes? Like, where does it go on a map? Start with you, Alec.
Does it go right under I-5?
It crosses under I-5 for sure, because I-5 runs the whole state, so it's got to cross there somewhere.
Does it track with the North Cascades?
Does it? So this is an east-west fault.
Okay, so
I was also perfectly imagining north-south.
So it runs under Bremerton, and then it follows the ferry line from Bainbridge Island to Seattle, and then it runs under the Chinatown International District in Pioneer Square, and then after that it follows I-90 to the south end of Lake Sammamish.
So nothing important along the way.
I just guessed the wrong interstate.
So, okay, I got another question for you. How often do we have earthquakes along the Seattle Fault? Now this is an average, of course.
And these include the tiny ones that nobody feels?
We'll say how often do we have major earthquakes along the Seattle Fault?
Ooh, once every 25 years?
What would you say, Alec?
Once every 2,500 years.
Wow.
Big range there. About every 1,000 years. Yeah, this is how often.
So right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But some upcoming research by the U.S. Geological Survey that's still under review suggests that the recurrence interval could be half of that. So, Monica, you said every 25 years. It's probably because you were thinking of a little bit smaller earthquakes. But I'm talking about a big quake on that fault that would knock down a whole bunch of buildings.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so every 1,000 years. How long has it been since the last big one on the Seattle Fault?
Ooh.
10,000 years?
I'm going to guess 25,000 years. I'm just doing 25 by powers of 10 here.
Well, the last one happened in the winter of 923 to 924 AD. So about 1,000 years and 100 years. So the interval is expected to be on average 1,000 years. And we've had 1,100 years since the last one.
I just thought maybe it would be a really long interval. And so we were like really, really extra overdue for one. Because that's like the vibe I get when talking to people about earthquakes.
Yeah, we're about 10% overdue.
Okay, that's a little more reasonable than I expected. I feel like after hearing your story, there is going to be an earthquake tomorrow, if not today.
Okay, finally, where is the best place to see clear evidence of the most recent earthquake on the Seattle Fault?
Is it maybe somewhere like Pioneer Square where there's kind of remnants of the old city and the new city, and maybe you can kind of see like a little jolt or a line or something?
That's a good guess. Where would you say?
I'm trying to remember the coverage I read about the last big one, and that there were like folk stories from different communities around the Pacific Rim that referenced a big wave or a big event. So I was trying to think of something creative, but honestly, I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, it could be that both those things are true. Alec, I don't know if there's a spot where you can like see a split in the ground or something like that. It's actually a little bit too deep for that under Seattle. It's not a deep fault. It's a shallow fault, but still it's under all the city mostly. But the answer is the best place to see the evidence is by biking or driving around the shoreline of West Seattle. South Seattle and West Seattle are slowly rising up over the top of North Seattle, kind of like when you pull a boat up a sandy beach. And as the land of Western Washington contracts like an accordion, the land to the south of the fault rises up, sometimes very dramatically. And the most dramatic spot was about a mile south of the Alki Point Lighthouse, where Jacobson Street meets Beach Drive. I know we won't know where that is, but West Seattle people might. But that spot along the shore rose up 23 feet in under a second.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
That's wild.
They know it's under a second because these quakes are always that quick. That's the height of 4 professional basketball players standing on each other's shoulders.
That's a big jump.
And then there's another spot at the Alki Beach Pier, which is sort of on the north side, and that land rose 10 feet in under a second.
So you're saying it's a good thing to invest in beachfront property early?
Well, thank you for bringing us all those earthquake facts and for helping me calm down a little bit.
Yeah, you got these are 1,000-year time frames, so
Got plenty of time, unless we don't.
that's it for Booming. Thanks so much for listening.
If you have a question about the economy that you want us to answer, email us at booming@kuow.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-221-7158.
Also, special thanks to those of you who are donating to the show. We couldn't do it without you. If you want to donate, go to kuow.org/booming. And thanks.
Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols.
And we'll see you next time.
On the latest episode of Sound Politics, Washington voters aren't happy with Governor Bob Ferguson after his first 6 months in office, but everyone seems to have a different reason. Is there one through line?
We'll find it. I think there's a $ involved.
Plus, Sound Politics is 1 year old, and what a year it's been. Time to reflect.
Sound Politics, wherever you get your podcasts.